Good morning, Josh.
Morning.
Thank you for joining us at Beam's Unplugged interview.
You're welcome.
So let's get to the first question. For the audience, would you describe to us what you work on at Uber and what your role is or your most recent projects?
Sure. So I work on a team called the Reliability Platform. It's part of a larger organization called Site Reliability Engineering. There's similar organizations at Facebook, at Google. And the idea of the larger organization is to make sure that our data centers, our servers, and our software is running and working. My specific team builds tools that enable engineers to make sure things are working. So we work on two primary tools, or actually three. One is integration and load testing framework and service. So you can say when you deploy new software, is this software functional? Does it handle large amounts of load? Can I make sure that the performance is still good? Another piece is called it is a system that allows you to check whether the software passes a certain set of gates. So when you release, when you're working on a service, you need to make sure like all these checkboxes are checked off so that you have high quality for that service. And then the third piece of software is we work on like providing test accounts to users. Some large tech companies have staging environments. Uber currently does not. We have staging clusters for certain pieces of software, but not everything. So we have to figure out a way to thread testing with through our production system. And so our team manages like creating those accounts that allow you to do the testing. So yeah, those are the three pieces of software that our team works on. I, as a new grad, about 2 years ago now, built the first version of the load testing and integration testing framework. We call it Hailstorm, and I got to name it, which was pretty fun. But that was a pretty intense experience because I was building it for the most part by myself, and I made a few mistakes. For example, I used MySQL, which is a database, and when we started a very large test, all of our processes for sending load to a service were connecting to the same database, and they ended up taking that database down, which if that database had been isolated would not have been too big of a problem. But that database actually was serving a lot of business traffic. It was a shared database with a bunch of other important business functions in it. So I had to explain to the CTO why I architected that software poorly. I've been working on, as I mentioned, test accounts, and that's my primary focus now. And so that's what I do today. Most of the work on the Hailstorm load testing framework was it was a lot of development, a lot of like figuring out what users needed, but mostly just like focusing on making sure the framework worked correctly and was scalable. And now my work is more focused on interfacing with a lot of different teams. So because test account needs all these different parameters to function correctly, I have to work across a variety of engineering teams at Uber to make sure that it's put together well.
Cool. What does your typical day look like at Uber? What's on your calendar for the rest of today?
So today's a good day. I like to think of no meeting days as good days. So this is fortunately my only meeting today, but this is a fun one. So most of my days, I tend to not have a lot of meetings because I'm an engineer. My manager has a lot more meetings, but I'd say I usually roll into the office around, like today I got in at 10, usually around 10:30. I'll get into the office, and I usually in the morning, I'll probably won't have much going on till lunch. And then after lunch, I'll probably have a meeting or two. And I usually try and have at least 3 or 4 hours of just like dedicated coding time. Not always coding, but if I don't have like a dedicated block of time, then it's very hard to focus on any like in-depth task that I'm trying to work on. especially because, as I mentioned, my project involves a lot of different teams, so I really need a lot of time to like understand the different components that interact with each other. And then I usually leave the office somewhere around 6, so not too crazy of a work day, but occasionally I'll get online later at night. But today I'm going to a friend's concert in the Mission, so I'm really excited about that.
That's
and
fun.
she's actually a Stanford alum as well.
Mm. What kind of opportunities did you find at Uber that you couldn't find at Stanford?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so you mentioned previously, as we were discussing over email, just career development and things like that. I'd say that, at least as far as I've seen, we don't have a ton of career development materials, although I don't think that's a negative thing. I think that working at a very large tech company is really exciting. So just to give you an example, when I started Uber, we were around 2,000 people, and now we're over 10,000 people. I want to say we were less than 500 engineers, and now we're over 2,000 engineers. So the pace of change is just insane. It's crazy. And really being able to work at a company that's innovating so rapidly, that has all these really hard engineering challenges, and really not challenges that are always like super technical, just the challenge of like having to support so many people with not enough engineers. There's a lot of space for like work to be done that's just new work. So like I mentioned, when I was the only person working on this load testing framework. Maybe at a larger company that's already well established, they already have something there. So if I were to join, I wouldn't have the opportunity to develop it new from scratch. The project that I work on currently has shifted hands a few times, but I actually was one of the first people working on it. We had a hackathon week, and during that week, a friend and I developed the first version of Test Account. So actually, both of the projects that I've worked primarily on at Uber were projects that I helped initiate and start. I think that's pretty unique. And also just the caliber of engineers, like getting to work with a lot of really smart people is really awesome.
Cool. Let's talk more about Uber then. Uber is a trendsetter in the car sharing technology, right? It's introduced a concept that didn't exist in this world, so it must be really cool to be in the forefront of that industry. So what are the trends in car sharing industry that you observe these days?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think the obvious answer that comes to everyone's mind is autonomous cars. And it's interesting having an inside view because for a while, Uber was not interested in getting into that space. But at a certain point, we made a really big splash by like basically taking a good portion of Carnegie Mellon's like engineering department, creating the Pittsburgh Advanced Technology Center, and more recently we've acquired Otto. So I think that's definitely like clearly the most exciting, like new fancy part of Uber being on the forefront of technology. I think that in my conversations with a lot of new grads, the other things that we do are really missed though. I hear a lot of people say, oh, I really want to work on machine learning. And I think that's interesting. I mean, definitely the stuff that our autonomous car offices are doing is really exciting. But there's a lot of other really important challenges at Uber. I think one that's like really easy to grasp, but really difficult to work on is mapping. We have been, I want to say that, I know that I'm trying to figure out how I can frame this. We rely on Google for maps, but Google is developing an autonomous car. So that's not necessarily the best situation competitively. So developing our own in-house maps is super, super important. It's something that I think like when you say maps, people don't get all excited as they do about autonomous cars. But without maps, we don't have autonomous cars. So producing really, really high quality maps is something that's extremely important to Uber. Not only maps that are just like actual street maps, which a driver only needs a street map. They don't need information about the buildings, the surroundings, or the street lights. But an autonomous car needs maps that are much more detailed. So we have a pretty substantial mapping team that works on a variety of like maps at different levels of granularity. One really interesting fact is, I'm probably gonna get this wrong, but if you look at a map of the cars going across New York, we actually map New York, I wanna say within every 5 minutes. All of Manhattan, we like map every street within 5 minutes. That number might be a little off because the last time I heard the metric was a while ago, but suffice to say, within a short amount of time, Uber drivers map like large sections of cities, which is just really exciting. So when you have that information, there's so many things you can do with it. I know that lately we're sharing some of our mapping information cities to provide them traffic data. Beyond maps, there's a lot of issues on the infrastructure side of things that I work on, scaling a business, scaling data centers. But I think that the mapping portion is really interesting. It's something people miss a lot when they're discussing the autonomous car part of the industry.
Cool. Yeah, I just learned something new today about like how the maps are an important part of the autonomous car trends. And speaking of which, students here seem to be learning skills that seem directly useful in the industry and in the society these days. So if a student were to join in on the stream of autonomous car and building better high quality maps for Uber, how can a student prepare oneself to be directly useful at Uber? What kind of skills should they practice? What kind of technologies should they learn?
That's a great question. I think I want to say that if you're, so specifically if you're wanting to be an engineer at Uber, because I think that's the thing I can speak to the best. I think the Stanford computer science curriculum prepares you very well for being an engineer at Uber. In terms of like specific classes to take or like areas to focus on, if you're really interested in the autonomous cars, then yes, you'd want to take some machine learning classes. If you're really interested in mapping, you probably would want to take some of the human computer interaction classes or the data visualization classes. I think one thing to keep in mind though is some of the more shiny aspects of like, working on the autonomous car, those positions are usually reserved for people who have a master's degree or PhD, like people who have spent a lot of time working in the machine learning field. So if a student's interested in that, they should realize that they're going up against people who have a lot of experience. And so if they're really interested in developing that area, they may want to, do a co-term or potentially do something longer. I think in terms of just being an engineer day to day, not necessarily in the machine learning area, like I said, the Stanford curriculum prepares you very well. As I think of the company, there's like probably 4 areas of engineering. One is infrastructure, and that's the area that I work in. Another is product focused, and that's, as you can imagine, we have like the driver app, the rider app, and then versions for iOS and Android. So there's a lot of engineers that work there also on web facing products. And then we have mapping, which I kind of consider like separate because they do a lot of very different stuff from what the product people do, and they build on top of our infrastructure. And then the autonomous car area. They all build on top of our infrastructure team, but the problems they focus on are very different. So in terms of if you're wanting to work in like the product area or the infrastructure area, the basic Stanford computer science degree requirements will prepare you very well for either. There is, I know that there's a class, like there's a web application class, and I think that might be useful, but I think more importantly, the things that really prepared me for working at Uber were the internships I had previously. Like the coursework prepares you for the work you're doing, but the mentality and like the day-to-day work and just the tools that you need to use, the internships really prepare you for.
So I'm assuming your internship was at other companies?
Yes.
Okay. Then about the cultural differences that you've seen at Uber and these other companies, or as opposed to Stanford for one, what's unique about Uber and how is Uber similar to Stanford?
Sure. I think the best part just about working and probably in general is compared to Stanford is I'm not worried about my grades. Certainly you have to be worried about your performance as an employee. But day to day, I'm not like worrying that I got an A or a B on a test. And I think that, at least in my experience, students at Stanford are really excited, very smart, really motivated. But it's also, I wouldn't say that I felt like there was cutthroat competition because it wasn't like people were mean. But there's definitely this mindset of like everyone's doing really well, everyone's working really hard, everyone's like getting the best grades. And I think that I can understand how that mentality, I mean, when you're in school, like grades are the only way you have to really like measure your success in a very tangible, quantitative way. I think working at Uber and as I said, probably working at other companies as well, you're not focused so much on these day-to-day quantitative metrics of success. Certainly you have to have metrics of success and they can be quantitative, but it's not like an A or a B every quarter. So I think one of the things that I really like about Uber and just about working in general is when I come to work, I'm helping other people do things. So for example, the test account service that I work on is used weekly by at least 200 other people, if not more. So the work that I'm doing has a very tangible effect in like making people's lives at Uber easier. And that culture of like building things together and collaborating, I feel like something that's much more important at Uber than versus at Stanford, where maybe you work on a few group projects, but in general you're like your own, you're following your own path at school. In terms of comparing Uber's culture to the companies I worked at previously, I did a few internships. I did an internship at VMware. I did an internship at a company called Nicira, which does software networking and was acquired by VMware. And then I interned for, I also did research one summer for a computer science professor, and I did an internship at Udacity. So that was an extended internship. It was like 8 months. I think compared to Nicira and VMware, the two enterprise software companies, Uber feels a lot younger. And maybe just a tiny bit less stodgy. Like VMware was a very well-established company, and Nicira was new, but I felt like their area of interest was very, very focused. So I feel like here at Uber, there's just a lot more opportunities to work on interesting things because we have so many problems to be solved. And then compared to Udacity, Udacity was roughly, I want to say around 80 people when I was interning there. And I really liked Udacity. I felt like there was a really familial, friendly atmosphere. And I think everyone there really, really cared about education. Compared to Uber, I feel like Uber can be a little, I know I just talked about collaboration, but I feel like Uber can be a little more intense. It's very business focused. We definitely have a mindset of work hard, play hard. Whereas at Udacity, I think it was a more, because there's only 80 people, everyone knew each other. So it's definitely a bigger company feel here as well.
It seems like you had very diverse experience in research-related things, in something that's focused about academia, like Udacity, enterprise solution, and now you're at like consumer products. So you must have a very broad perspective on this. And as someone who's already in the industry, you'll have better experience than any of the undergrads here about the job search. So how did you find out that this is the job you want after having experienced all these different parts of the industry? And what advice do you have for students who are currently in the job search process?
Sure. So when I was searching for a job, I actually spent 8 months at Udacity during undergrad. So I had a really good sense of what working at Udacity would be like if I decided to go there full time. I was more interested in working at a company that was larger, that had a bit more of a rapid pace of growth. And so I started to try and like search for things that like talked about like how should you get a first job, and like what should a first job look like, and I more importantly I wanted to understand, like I knew a bit about what I wanted from a first job, but I didn't really know what to be looking for. So I would highly recommend this guide by the CEO of Wealthfront. I forget what the title of it is, but if you search like Wealthfront CEO startup guide, it'll definitely come up. And it's like a multi-page PDF that talks about what it's like working for a startup, and how, and like if you're planning to work in tech, like what you should look for. So really the essentials are: look for a company that's mid-size, that has a good track record of growth, and that you think is going to be successful. And then there's also a list, which is occasionally updated, of companies that they think fit within that category. So at the time, Snapchat was one of those companies, and Uber was one of them. So I knew that when I read that and compared to my Udacity experience, I knew that sounded like a good fit. Like I wanted to work somewhere where after I spend 4 years at Uber, I will have like it's almost like Stanford. We go to Stanford thinking like you're going to have a shiny stamp of like, I went to Stanford. And it's similar with Uber. I was thinking like, I want to work somewhere where when I say I work there, then it reflects well on me, and it's like, I know my stuff. You know, I did good technical work. I was there when we were in a rapid pace of growth. So that was my mindset when I was interviewing. And I interviewed at Snapchat, also at Facebook, and at Uber. So those were the three that I picked to interview at.
Cool. I know I didn't tell you that I'll be asking this in advance, but would you tell me as a final note a fun or interesting fact about Uber that most students don't know about?
That most students don't know about. That's a hard question. Well, I'm trying to think of something that's like fun and not mundane. Or at least that I don't find mundane. I think one fun and interesting fact is that we had actually, no, I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk about that if it's going to be on social media. It's not bad. It's just something that we haven't spoke about much publicly. Oh, I got a great one. So I think one fun and interesting fact is, I mentioned this like week-long hackathon that we did previously. And so we call it Workation. It's something that was started by our CEO, Travis, a while ago. And the idea is over New Year's, so it's a bit of a iffy time for some people, but over New Year's, you join like a hackathon team, and then your hackathon team leader picks a location somewhere in the world to visit. So I have friends that have gone to Puerto Rico. I have friends that have gone to Ecuador, friends that have gone to Costa Rica. I've been to Tahoe on Workation, and I know that there's other teams that have gone to the Dominican Republic and Hawaii. So it's in the middle of winter and you get to go to most of the time, like a fun beach destination. And the idea is you get all of your hotel paid for that week or week and a half. And then you have to spend that time working on your hackathon project. So 2 years ago, I participated in that with a friend, and I was like, for the system that I was working on, we needed test accounts. We needed to do load testing, and we needed test accounts to do that. So I was like, all right, I want to work on test accounts. So we went to Tahoe. We got, I think, like a couple days of skiing in Tahoe, in addition to getting to work on this project. But the great thing is that the company funds the lodging. So the travel is not always covered, but it's, you know, the understanding is that you're going to get a lot of work done, but there'll also be some playtime. So workation at Uber is a pretty awesome thing. You get to meet people from all over the world because our offices are spread out globally. So one of the guys in our team was from London, and I occasionally still see him here in San Francisco. But I think that kind of rolls into the second really fun fact, which maybe is not as is more public, but we have offices everywhere. So just the breadth of people you get to meet working Uber is amazing. I can't imagine working in a company that has this much connection to the globe. Like, you know, Google has offices other places, Facebook has offices other places, but a lot of those are engineering offices or sales offices, where we have offices in many major cities around the world. And those offices are focused and really tied into the community. So I think that's really cool, because every 2 weeks we have new hiring orientation, and I'll occasionally go and get to meet someone from a side of the world that I've never been to.
Workation does sound very fun. I'll make sure students hear about this.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Josh, again.
You're welcome. Thank you.